We got some great questions. I got to find them, y'all. So like I said, we're here to discuss a topic of great significance to our community, the importance of geographic knowledge and geographic approaches, and specifically tools for designing and creating conditions for strong, resilient communities of color everywhere. And for us, we focus in particular on Black communities globally. The challenges that our communities are facing are complex and they are spatial. Challenges like inequality, environmental racism, gentrification, lack of representation. And when we use a geographic approach to solve for those challenges, we can solve for challenges faced by other communities as well. One thing I think we all have experienced is that when you consider equity and when you work equitably, you find solutions that you hadn't anticipated and everyone benefits. So today we have a unique opportunity to deeply explore these topics with members of the National Geographic Executive Leadership Team, a panel that brings a wealth of experience, insight, and passion to this conversation. Plus, we've got, really extensive backgrounds here in higher education. I'm sure people will talk a bit about their work sometime, apparently even here on this campus. And as you'll see in a minute, these folks are dedicated to advancing the understanding of geographic knowledge and how it can inspire and uplift communities. They work for an organization that is 135 years old. They are now a part of the fabric of something that has been happening since 2 or 3 times my years of life. And we hope that today's discussion will serve as a catalyst for future collaborations, innovation, and importantly, action. As we work together to harness the power of geographic knowledge for the benefit of our community and beyond. With that, if everyone is ready, I want to get started. And it looks like our first question is for Crystal, Chief Communications, Marketing, and Brand Officer at Nat Geo. Hope it's okay if can we call you Nat Geo? Is that all right?
The Society.
The Society. The
National
Society.
Geographic.
Oh, I love it. NorthStar or NorthStar of GIS. The S is capitalized. So I wanted to start by zooming out a bit to get a sense of the Society's charge today. Can you tell us about the work of the Society, its new strategic plan, NG Next, which I'm really excited about, and the charge of that plan?
Yes, I'm happy to. And you tipped me off, so I'm going to say HU. It's super exciting to be back on Howard's campus and to be having this conversation. So a little bit about NG Next. Our strategic plan is, quite audacious. When you think about our organization, we've been around 135 years. And while we're a world-renowned brand, we aren't always known for our mission work. We're not always known for our explorer-led programs. We aren't always known that we're a nonprofit organization. And so a lot of what NG Next does is doubles down on that, right? And really puts the focus about how we're going to chart the next chapter, how we're going to chart forward. And so the center of that plan is all about our explorers. The work that we fund, the programs that are led by explorers, and at the aim of everything that we do is we talk about inspiring the explorer in everyone, right? And so what does that really look like? And a lot of how that gets amplified around the world is through the programs that we fund and through the work of our explorers. Our mission at National Geographic Society is to illuminate and protect the world through exploration, education, science, and storytelling, right? So we've been doing that for 135 years and have had a lot of impact in that regard. But as we think about the next chapter, how do we do that more inclusively? How do we do that thinking through a global lens of today as opposed to yesteryear 135 years ago. So a lot of our strategic plan, I think, is centering us, is giving us focus. It's bringing in a whole new generation of young explorers, of young audiences to help us tell this next chapter. I think is super exciting. And I'm thrilled to chat a bit about what we're going to talk about today through the GIS lens.
Cool. Thank you, Crystal. When I think about my early interactions with Nat Geo, there's like that mix of, because I'm old. So in the 80s, in the 70s, when I encountered Nat Geo magazines for the first time, you know, as a small child, I was really excited to see Black people on its pages sometimes. And as I got older and went into spaces with a more critical eye, I could see that while there were Black people in the pages, they weren't always directing the story. They weren't in control of the narrative, and and I've seen that shift under your leadership. So Shannon, next question for you. As the Society's first Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, can you talk about how the Society defines who an explorer is today and how the organization prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion?
All right. Well, first I want to say it's so wonderful to be here. And I have a similar story, right? As a Black American, my connection to the brand was complicated. Like you, I credit my curiosity of the world to National Geographic, getting the magazine. My grandmother had a subscription, and everyone's grandmother, like many grandmothers or grandparents had subscriptions. And just, seeing the amazing places and peoples of the world depicted there. But as I got older, I started to recognize the depictions of people from parts of the world were one-dimensional, that we weren't the ones telling the stories, the words that were used to describe peoples and places. And so I'll be honest, I was, National Geographic, okay, but really National Geographic? Because, I'm sitting I come from higher education, I'm looking around the room and seeing books, and one of the early missions of the organization was to disperse knowledge. And if it's sitting in a book, if it's sitting on a shelf, are you really sharing knowledge? Who's authoring it? And how do we make sure that I didn't want to continue join an organization that was continuing the past of National Geographic. And so I asked a lot of questions, right? I was a little hesitant, but as Crystal said in her remarks, I saw the potential for change, for shaping a National Geographic I'd want my kids to see or experience when they were growing up in NG Next, in the strategic plan that had diversity, equity, and inclusion embedded in it. Not just on a side, let's think about DEI, but actually saw it as DEI had to be an integral part of its programmatic and operations work. And that was one of the reasons that they wanted to create the role, to recognize that this isn't just about recruiting and retention, it's how we do everything, how we think about who we're educating, how do we think about how we're bringing our grant recipients in, and that it really had to be part of the foundation of our work. And so with that foundation, in both having the NG Next DI through line, diverse, when I think about what the founders of National Geographic, who were 33 white men in DC, if they looked and realized that this was the leadership of the organization, they would be like, what happened? And I'm like, we happened. I have never served on as demographically diverse a senior team as I do at the organization. And it's, I've served in roles, in organizations where I was the only one in the diversity role, maybe in HR, but we have people in many different roles. And that was another reason that I could see that the organization was really making the shift. And so with that new foundation, the new plan, a new team, a new vision, we are really challenging ourselves as an organization, and frankly been challenged by many, including Mr. Johnson on on the panel here, to really reflect on our history, to acknowledge it, to acknowledge the oppressive systems that dictated who could be funded, what stories we told, who told those stories, and that we excluded many voices and perspectives in our history. And so we're asking those deeper questions about whose voices are heard and whose aren't. We're challenging ourselves to have some difficult conversations and to fundamentally reimagine and transform all of our policies and practices, and to upend the status quo. To challenge mapping. We have Alex Tate here, our geographer. Yeah, the geographer. He's always reminding us that maps have authors, and they depict a vision of and a story, and they're not the story. And so what are the different ways we can think about depicting places and visualizing places? So we have a lot of difficult conversations, and that's fundamentally altered the way we explore. Whereas at the founding, it was mainly sending white, mostly American men or men from the global north to places to discover and explore places where people lived and knew those stories. Today, the majority of our explorers that we fund each year are actually doing work in their home region. And you see that on the stage. You see at Explorers Festival, that is, people from all over the world who are passionate about communities. I talk about the shift from the I, the singular person, have saved a species, to the we, just the collectivism and the communitarian view. And that's a result of these efforts to really rethink how we tell our stories and who we're funding, and that reflects itself in our diverse staff too. So, we've seen a lot of progress. We have a lot of work to do, but like I said, I appreciate that it really does feel like a fundamental shift in who we are, the stories we're going to tell, and I'm looking forward to, in the company of these amazing women across the organization and our new explorers coming in, to seeing what the next 135 years of National Geographic looks like. And I'm sure it won't be books on the shelf. It really will be when my kids and my great-grandchildren are looking at the National Geographic, that they'll see themselves, and they won't have this complicated relationship to it. And that's the future that I'm hoping that we'll chart.
And that future is clearly well underway. I get the magazine, and I see such a diverse representation of people now that I just did not see before. And I certainly wish I was that kid growing up today who could go into schools that may not always want me there, where those little kids have those things to say about where there's every opportunity to belittle you, to be able to feel empowered by something that is, and also inspired to do incredible work around the world. So thanks for that, Shannon. So now to Karen. You're also in a newly created position, Senior Vice President of Content, Diversity, and Inclusion for National Geographic lines of businesses that are operated through or by the Walt Disney Company. Can you share more about that role and how you're working across Disney to ensure that National Geographic content is diverse and inclusive?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It is truly a pleasure and privilege to share this stage with my esteemed colleagues. My experience of National Geographic, if I may go back to just how I started at National Geographic, is a little different from Shannon's experience. I've been at National Geographic for 25 years, and I did not have a connection to the brand. My grandparents did not subscribe to the National Geographic magazine. My connection and engagement to the National Geographic magazine was in doctors' offices when I went with my grandparents and parents to the doctor's office. But here I was in 1997, found myself in a wonderful opportunity to work in television. So my experience at National Geographic has always been on the for-profit television production side of the business. And I started as a post-production coordinator. And I may add that I am perhaps the only employee on the television side of the business that has held every position from entry-level coordinator all the way to senior vice president. So that is truly an indication of persistent, patient passion, resilience, resistance, and a movement. It's a revolution, y'all. But I got into television production because I had a hero in Oprah Winfrey. So she graced our airwaves as I came of age in the 80s, and I was 13 years old and saw this brown-skinned, full-figured, unapologetic woman teaching us, or me, I won't put that on you, but teaching me about the world and topics about the world I had not heard. And it was at that point that I vowed to change perception of Black people through the media. Now, when I say patient, persistent passion, I did not realize or remember that passion because my career took many pivots as I entered the doors of National Geographic in 1997. But we fast forward to summer of 2020 when I was the only Black executive on the television side of the business at that time. And I was asked to lead National Geographic content in its diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as it relates to our cultural and content assessment. Are we living up to our mission of telling global stories by global peoples? And when they asked me to lead that, I reluctantly said yes. Because if not me, then who? I grew to love the brand. I grew to appreciate that it is, in terms of factual storytelling, the most trusted, iconic brand of the world, and that we did have a responsibility to showcase that diverse people, Black people specifically, were at the center of the pillars of our storytelling towards science, history, culture, exploration, and travel. And so it was then that I pitched the idea of becoming the head of our inclusive content and engagement team, which means that I work very closely with our development teams, production teams, across all platforms of content, and I think there are 8 platforms of content, including social media, digital magazine, streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu, as well as our linear networks, and marketing to ensure that not only are we telling diverse and inclusive stories, but that we are reaching a broader, multi-generational, multicultural audience through our marketing efforts and social media efforts. So that's my inclusive content side of the job. My engagement side of the job is connecting with communities that National Geographic had not spent a lot of time engaging in a meaningful, impactful way. And Shannon talked about representation. Representation, as we know, matters. And so in the office of National Geographic on the content side of the business, you have to take a look at who's not sitting at the table, helping us to develop, market, publish, and produce those stories. And so I, went to leadership at that time and was like, we need to start helping to cultivate the next generation of storytellers, factual storytellers. And so in order to do that, I want to work with historically Black colleges and universities with students who are hoping to become storytellers and create a scholarship program. And it is the first time in National Geographic's history, at least on the content side of the business, I can't speak for the society, where we have engaged in such a meaningful, impactful way with our historically Black colleges and universities. And so there are 3 components to this scholarship program, and I am proud to say that Howard University has been a partner of ours in all 3 years and will remain a partner for each year moving forward because, of course, we're 10 blocks away. And so Howard University needs to be at the forefront of our mind when we talk about cultivating the next generation of factual storytellers. So the 3 components of this scholarship program is a financial award towards tuition. We know that's important and that's meaningful to our students. But the other 2 components to me is what creates impact. They receive a National Geographic Executive Mentor for no less than 6 months. And they have a 1-week immersive experience on our headquarters campus 10 blocks away that takes them through development to distribution of content across all platforms, all 8 or 9 platforms of content. And that is what gives exposure, access, and opportunity when it comes to cultivating the next generation of storytellers. We do not want to be our grandparents' National Geographic. We want to evolve to engage an audience, a broader, multicultural, multi-generational audience. And in order to do that, we have to have relevant and relatable content. And in order to have relevant and relatable content, we have to have relatable and relevant people telling stories through a lived experience. And so that is what my job is. And I'm happy to say that even within the past 20 months, National Geographic has had the most diverse offering of content on television and on social media and in our magazines than we have ever had. Now, we have a long way to go, but I won't allow perfection to get in the way of celebrating the progress. And so I am extremely proud of the work that we are doing. And I'm just going to say, you know, in no arrogant way, but under my leadership, because it's important to have representation at the senior level to ensure that these things are getting done in order to cultivate the next generation of factual storytellers.
Thank you for your passionate, meaningful, and impactful service, Karen. Really appreciate it. And you touched on education. We touched on it a little bit before. And in our mission at NorthStar, we know that education is critical to engaging the next generation of geo-thinkers. And as one of the society's newest explorers myself, you know, and again, through our mission, I'm always really interested in how the society is broadening its reach and amplifying. I think the very first time I met you in the lunch line, what was wrong with me? I just, you know, like I'm really curious in understanding how you all are working with K-12 and higher education. So Deborah, this next question is obviously for you. It's funny. First time I met her, just asked her a question. Barely said hi.
You didn't say hi.
I said, oh, you're her. Oh, okay. As the Society's Chief Education Officer, what's your vision for the Society's education division, and how do you incorporate you know, a geographic approach into that work?
Sure. I think since we were sharing origin stories, I'm going to share 2 quick ones, and then I'll get to that. So first, this really does feel like a homecoming to me. I'm a native Washingtonian. DC, Howard is very much a part of my history. So I wanted to say that. And 2, like Shannon, I had an interesting relationship with National Geographic. When this first came up, I was like, this is interesting. I didn't grow up with the magazine in my family. My parents wouldn't allow it. And I think my grandparents did have a subscription, and my parents, you know, children of the 60s, they have very strong feelings about how people of African descent were represented. So fast forward, 30-some years, when this came up, and I was talking to my family about it, I admit everybody gave me the side eye. But then, you know, I had read NG Next as Crystal described it, and I talked about the new CEO and her dynamism and leadership. And then I said, and if that weren't enough, there are 2 other Black women on the leadership team. That has never happened to me at any institution or organization where I've been. And so I was really interested in the through line of diversity and how it impacts education and every other aspect of the work at the Society. So I'm actually the new kid on the block. I just passed my 1-year anniversary at the Society. It's been a really interesting experience. I come from higher ed, but also international development as part of my background. And what I like about the Society is that I get to bring all of those elements into the work that I do. We take an intentional, interdisciplinary, and globally focused approach to our work. We really try to meet educators where they are and to really understand what their needs are. My goal is to make the work that educators do much easier and have greater access to the tools that we make available at the Society. We really operate in my division at the nexus of our mission of exploration and illumination, and the focus on protecting the wonders of our world. We try to teach people about the real work of the Society, our mission, the work that explorers do, and how we can support young people and educators to make meaningful change inside and out of the classroom. So we do that through working with people like Clinton, who did. I was standing there and he said, so what are you doing to connect with HBCUs? And I'm like, who are you? You know, and let me understand, you know, the context of this. And so it took me a beat, and then I was like, oh, okay. You know, it was good, but I was a little shocked, I have to admit. And so we do, you know, as part of our work, making really important relationships, partnerships, collaboration, through focusing, again, on the work of explorers and the projects that they do, but also working with organizations like NorthStar, like Esri, in the development of tools like MapMaker, in developing content, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we get into it. Also, as I think Shannon already mentioned, our geographer Alex is here, but also my left and my right hand, Faye Gore, is here, and she really leads the partnership work of our division.
Real quick, I want to thank you for that, and for continuing to be pleasant towards me after that encounter. I really don't know what I was on that day, y'all.
But you know what it showed me was you were serious and passionate, and once I kind of caught myself and was like, okay. But it was good, and we've been really focused on it ever since. I appreciate you.
Thank
no
you.
problem.
I appreciate you too.
But you did shock me.
I was texting my friends, I just made an enemy. What did I do?
Not at all, not at all.
How are we doing on time, team? We're good? Cool. So we're gonna open it up to questions. Do folks have any questions?
What doesn't?
I was about to say everything.
It's a heavy question, but I will say this. I have always felt a sense of duty and service in every role that I've been. When I was here at Howard, I was telling them it's a ministry, and it's the same for National Geographic. And what keeps me up at night is, are we responsibly telling the stories? Are we doing that authentically? We have the reach. We have the trusted brand, and we can touch lives more authentically than I think any other brand in the world. And so with that comes a tall order of duty. And what keeps me up is making sure that we're making the right decisions, we're putting the right content out, we're amplifying diverse lived experiences, right? Because it's not one-dimensional, and so much of that has to do with, and we've all touched on it, but Karen touched on it a lot when she said it really is about who's not at the table here, right? And how do you fix that, channel that, represent that, shore that piece up, right? And so those are the questions. There's a lot of micro questions in that, but that's what keeps me up at night, is are we fulfilling the opportunity that has been bestowed upon us at this moment in time? And there is a lot going on in the world, for sure. Yeah.
Because that also keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night as it pertains to my professional life, because I have a daughter in college, so that keeps me up at night too. But my professional life, and alert during the day, exactly. Yeah, I share the sentiments of Crystal, is telling stories intentionally and in an authentic way with varied representation. What keeps me up at night is cultural competency among our development, production, publishing, and marketing teams, creative teams. And when I say cultural competency, making sure that we are telling stories through a lived experience and not the gaze that made Deborah's family give her the side eye or Shannon's hesitancy around the stories we were telling in the magazine. And so every time I walk into a development room with our creative teams, I have the huge responsibility, along with everyone else, because I'm not carrying the weight alone. We're all accountable, of ensuring we have levels of cultural competency. So part of my job is connecting our creative teams with individuals and organizations through different dimensions of diversity to give us a toolkit, if you will, to ensure that we have levels of cultural competency in telling these authentic, intentional stories, and then connecting with production partners through a lived experience. Because we do want to tell on the content side of the business, the entertainment side of the business, our mission is to tell gripping stories so that people could grow a deeper connection to our world. But I want to make sure whose world and whose connection.
Just real quick, I want to just say something, and then I saw a question from Toussaint. I'm excited that you all are here and bringing DEI to the forefront of our conference and conversation. It's the first thing that we're talking about. And what I remember now that I wanted to mention before is that sometimes people tell us we have to work 10 times harder, 5 times harder, 2 times harder. You've heard one of these things. And what I learned pretty quickly in my career, fortunately, was that some of that hard work wasn't just in the skill set that I was hired for. Your excellence in geo will always serve you well, but it's not the only thing that you need to succeed. Your excellence in technology or science or writing, whatever your discipline is, it'll always serve you well. But some of what we have to work smarter at is interrupting bias or bringing that cultural competent lens. And you all have it as your charge. But any of us who are navigating through probably any field, we also have to sort of interrupt bias whenever we see it in order to succeed. So we'll be sprinkling this kind of conversation all throughout, not just as something that is sort of like an overlay to the work, but is integral to the work in the practices that we think of as geo practices, but also in showing up to work and encountering challenges and advancing progress and success. Toussaint, you had a question just a second.
My question would be, especially as a student, I think a lot of times we go into different spaces that we're not used to a little bit over our heads. So what are some qualities or some things that you would like to see, and it could be, more than just students kind of educated on, before we try to go out into other spaces and solve the problems that, they're causing with other people? What are some things internally that we could focus on or get better at so that we're better equipped to handle, all the different challenges that come ahead?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for your question. I think a couple of things, especially as a former classroom teacher and professor, to not be afraid to ask questions, to not be afraid to be wrong or mess up. To me, messing up is a growth opportunity, and so always being open to learning. I tend to enter rooms with a listening posture to kind of see what people are talking about and understanding the context of that work. Don't feel pressured to settle on something immediately in terms of what your area of focus might be. Really give yourself, especially in your undergraduate years, the opportunity to be exposed to different things, where there's opportunity to take on interdisciplinary lessons so that you can learn at the nexus of ideas. I think sometimes is where the interesting questions are. And I think sometimes we go in, thinking that we know what we're going to do. And sometimes those can be blinders and you miss opportunities for other things. Build community, connect with your professors, connect with other people across the campus who have interests similar to your interest, but also very different. and just expose yourself to as much as possible. And the last thing, what else is a teacher going to say? Be a lifelong learner. Keep reading, keep, pushing back, keep exposing yourself to different opportunities, and where there's an opportunity to do so, travel.
I think that what I'd add there, and actually this is partially an answer to your question, which is what keeps me up is I'm tired. I think, I'm guessing, in May 2020, I thought that maybe that it felt like things were going to be different. And, now it's 2023 and we realize it's not different, right? The progress, it feels like a lot of the progress that was being made is, being pulled back. And I don't know that I have the energy to go back to what I was okay with or, thought was okay with in 2020. And and they all know, they're always like, Shannon, Shannon. So I think for me, it's partly managing energy, which is why the other thing I would add for you, Toussaint, is these spaces are hard, as Clinton said. As you advance in your career, I'm still, even in the society, I still frequently find myself in meetings where I am the only person of color, the only woman. And that it makes you tired, right? Because you're not just navigating who you are and what you know, you're navigating everyone's expectations and stereotypes of you. So what I would add, and I want to acknowledge that still very much colors my day or my experience. And I wish I could say that things will be different for you all in your careers, but I think it won't be. So the importance of having that community where I can go in and be like, Crystal, can we talk about this? Or Deborah, let's talk about this. Of having those spaces, because sometimes it's not you. And they will make it feel like it is you. And it is not. And so being able to have those friends, those colleagues, those mentors, those sponsors who you can have those conversations with, because it can be hard sometimes to not internalize what everyone else is putting on you. So you have to have those spaces. And that's why organizations like NorthStar are important, because it helps build that support network that can help you walk those moments. So.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's George Otterberry. I'm a Howard graduate, DC native. I literally grew up on Newton Street, but who knows what Newton Street is. But first I want to thank all of you on the stage. You're pioneers. What you do is vital. And my father gave me this side eye, and I got the magazine anyway. But I want to ask you a quick question. It's sort of a little different, but we see the magazine landscape has changed tremendously. I'm a collector of magazines, so I'm going to get it no matter what form it is. But how do you tell someone who's not into magazines, but they still want the content? I know how you've adapted, but what's the next mountain to crawl for National Geographic? How do you tell the Toussaints of the world, okay, this is vital, he's going to seek it out, but how do you make it palatable to his generation? Dinosaurs like myself, I'm going to seek it out, I'm going to collect it, put it on my bookshelf, but the Toussaints of the world, how do you make National Geographic relevant for his generation?
That is such an organic question for me to hold the mic. Social media. So National Geographic is the #1 brand on Instagram. That means we have over 500 million followers globally on Instagram. So that's more than the Kardashians, other Hollywood A-listers, Nike, you name it. We are the #1 brand. So brand, and we beat individuals. And so that's why it is more important. When I say relatable and relevant, that's what I mean in terms of how we get our stories out on different platforms. So there may be a different flavor of a story for magazine than for our linear television shows, and then for our Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And so I am working with the creative teams as we speak to start telling short form stories on our YouTube channel. that has over 250,000 followers and counting. So to tell these gripping stories that are relatable and relevant to a broader audience, you will find that on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. So we, again, going back to the notion of not being our grandparents, National Geographic, we've got to evolve the same way storytelling is evolving. And so we are working to actively do that.
And I'll just add, the other thing we talk a lot about is, if you want to tell a different story, you need a different storyteller, right? So what Karen's talking about is the reach part of it, right? How do we continue to touch those lives? But the other thing that's really important in the work we do is thinking about who took the photo, right? Who is behind the lens? I love the comment earlier that I think was a point Shannon made that Alex talks about, which is the map has an author, right? So again, if you peel back the layers, to me, that's where the opportunity in the work is. Who's authoring the map? Who's telling the story? Who's shooting? Are we? Do we have a photographer who is in his native land and he's telling a story through his authentic experience, or did we fly someone in to take that photo? It's going to both. You could end up with gripping photos, two very different photos, though, right? And so I think a lot of how we are evolving is we're asking ourselves those questions, and we're bringing a lot of discipline and creativity to that process. Yeah.
And I would say the next piece of that we're also working on is changing storytelling, right? I think step one is change the storytellers, right? Everyone, if I asked you all to close your eyes right now and imagine what does a National Geographic photographer look like to you, I'm sure we're all going to have a very similar picture, has a beard, has long hair. Right, and so next is change the storyteller, but now it's change storytelling. The reality is how you tell stories in different parts of the world is vastly different. And so to me, that's the exciting opportunity of next, which is what does storytelling look like if we change it from the way that those stories have been told, which to me is why partnerships like with NorthStar GIS are so important, because that is at the heart of what the organization is about, is changing the discipline by recognizing that you're bringing in these different perspectives. It doesn't have to be the way it always has to be. Has been, and that's where the opportunity is. What does geography or GIS look like when you have the perspectives of everyone in this room in a world in which it hasn't? And so to me, that's the exciting thing about challenging the status quo and not just asking why. It's why not? Why can't it be this way?
Dr. Amy Kwarkwame, Associate Professor of Africana Studies here at Howard University. Thank you for joining us here, Howard, on behalf of our president and our provost. We're excited to have you here. For the next 2 days, students will be coming in and out, and I want to ask this question for them so when they go back and watch this, they can get all the answers. One, when I think about National Geographic and maybe GIS, two things come up, space and place. So I was asking a question, what are some of the initiatives you have around maybe travel for students to be able to kind of begin to enter into the sense of analysis and study, but many times students don't see themselves doing the work because they haven't been to these places, right? Two, as far as skill development, what opportunities do you have as far as skill development for our students in learning how to maybe become a part of the field, right? In traveling, in telling stories about places, and then analysis. And three, for our communities who don't have, let's say, the channel or the magazine or the internet or the Wi-Fi, who are behind on the social media, on the digital divide, how are we connected to the young people and begin to having this early conversation about being a part of traveling, telling stories, analyzing, going to spaces? So in short, my question is, what opportunities do you have for our students and young people?
All right, I'm gonna try to hit all those, but call me out if I miss one. So I'll start at the end, and it kind of goes back to the question you were asking. The thing that keeps me up at night is related to access. So we design a lot, mostly digitally, but I'm also thinking, what are the analog options? What kinds of things can we put in teachers' hands in terms of building skill sets that would support learners. And so a lot of that work happens through the work that we're doing with Explorers. We're creating different types of tools. We're at the start of that and we have what we call the Explorer Mindset Learning Framework, which is to help learners of all ages really think like explorers, really understand the attitudes, skills, and knowledge that is necessary to, go out into the world and pursue these planet-changing opportunities. Take me back to you. I knew I was going to lose them. The other 2 points you had?
Other point, I think it's explorer, and interesting, explorer kind of comes off as Columbus. So are there any things that are going to be done to kind of change the language too, where students don't feel like I'm an explorer like Columbus, take over one, but skill building and travel. Skill building and travel.
So I'll talk about travel, but then I'm going to pass the mic to Shannon to tell you about how we're thinking about Explorer at this society, because she does that better than anyone I can think of. But we have had for the last 2 years a pilot program called Student Travel, where young people, and we had 6 from DC, if I have correctly, we make a point of making sure that we're supporting local students who have this opportunity. And they went to places like Galapagos, Tokyo, Baja, I'm trying to think. There were maybe 8 or so different places around the world, and we're going to do it again this year. We learned a lot about that program as a pilot, and we're probably going to fold it into some newer programs in development, like for early career immersion, where you get field opportunities to work with explorers and scientists and researchers, where you have the opportunity to travel to focus on specific topics like storytelling, which was one of them, photography was another. Since I've been there, one of the things that we've really focused on is how we can use GIS tools, opportunities for travel, and embed them in the different learning products that we develop. So it will be an aspect of everything that we're building. I will say that I don't know if we formally cracked the code, but it's something that's top of mind always for us. Again, accessibility, the different modalities that we can use to further learning and tools. So whether it's textbooks, whether it's actually printing things out and handing them to people, whether we're developing and designing our content as open educational resources that can be adapted for a cultural context around the world, we're really trying to be more expansive in what we're delivering. But in terms of Explorer, I really want Shannon to weigh in on that.
But before you do that,
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's so much going on. Yeah, so we do have, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy, we have an externship program. And I think it's something like 30% of the participants are from the continent of Africa, which I'm super excited about. It's an 8-week program. It's developed online. It's delivered online. And students connect from all over. They get mentoring. They create story maps through the program. They focus on different projects. So the last one, I believe, was freshwater. The new one that we're developing is actually on GIS. So that's coming, I believe, in the fall. Thank you for that reminder, Shannon.
Yeah, and I think as part of that, they can apply for grant. They do have projects. Yeah, they can get seed money for projects. And the other thing I would add is we do have an internship program. So I think last year we had 25 interns, and we have graduate students and undergrads. So also a great opportunity for current students to explore as well. So your question is an excellent one. It is the idea of when we think explore, capital E, we think of Columbus, we think of genocide, whether we're talking about cultural or people. And it is something that very much, as we've diversified our community, many of our explorers are coming from places that, big E exploration led to massacre of ancestors and culture. And so it's a term that that people, struggle with, right? And actually I was talking to a Brazilian explorer. He said the literal translation of the word explorer is exploitation. And so we actually had a conversation about it. Every year we have an Explorers Festival where we bring our grant recipients who are called explorers, and we actually had a conversation about can the term exploration be reclaimed, right? Is it one whose history is as too traumatic and problematic for us to really embrace? And we had a great panel from all over the globe, and at the end of the day, what we talked about was exploration, little e, as we think about it, is inherent in who we are as people, right? How we get to know our environments. How do we, curiosity about ourselves and others. And when we think about exploration at the organization, it's not this idea of going to far-flung places or going to space or going to the bottom of the ocean. It is looking around you in the places that you are in and asking questions. Why does the world look like this? Why is it that all the grocery stores happen to be in the white parts of town and there are none in the parts of town where people of color live? It's really thinking about who we are and our communities around you and why structures are the way. And that the consensus was, as part of this conversation, is exploration itself is not the problem. The problem is the legacy that we have of exploration as a result of the colonialist and imperialistic times. And so we are trying to, as we talk about exploration, we emphasize that it is curiosity and understanding impact of curiosity. It is about understanding your actions have consequences. And it's not bad to go to different places and to visit other countries, but how do you show up in that space? Are you coming without judgment? Are you coming with recognizing who you are and and the lens that you're bringing? So for us organizationally, exploration still feels like an important part of the human experience. And we acknowledge the legacy of that, and we acknowledge the ways the organization has fostered that problematic approach to exploration. But as we diversify our community, as we speak openly about that, we also think that exploration is essential to who we are as people, and that it's our obligation organizationally to correct that narrative and to make sure that everything we do is through the lens of inclusion and accessibility to be able to fully embrace exploration. But yeah, it's a wonderful question and something that is very top of mind for us as an organization. But.
The moderators.
I was at that event, that last one, as a newly minted explorer, and I had some thoughts myself. And when I was honored with being a wayfinder and learning that came with this title of National Geographic Explorer, a lot was going through my head. But I've long been in the business of filling up space for our people and not giving up space. And when I think about the notion of giving up the concept of exploring because others have done it dirty, no. To me, it's let's call them what they really were. Let's talk about what they really did. So someone was going out committing genocide and pillaging and taking what was others and doing it under the heading of exploration or explorer. Let's call that what that actually was, and let's keep filling up that space of exploration. It's just, my perspective on it. Appreciate you all. I can't imagine that we're not overtime. I can't imagine it. And I was going through some of our other additional questions, and I think you all hit just about everything. But I want to thank each and every one of you for your contribution to our event today, your comments today, your work as service to our communities and our shared, purpose and vision. And I want all of you to think about the ways in which you explore the world and have a passion for just understanding and think about the ways that you can illuminate the world around you and find your pathways to National Geographic and their resources and the services and content that they provide. So I want to make sure I hit all these points here. But again, I really appreciate the community that we have built as individuals, collectively, the community that you all have built across the National Geographic brand, the society. Love that. That's what are you claiming when you start talking about the society? When you say that word. Exactly. So I really appreciate all of that, and I hope you all have enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have, and